It was 7:42 in the morning. I know the exact time because I looked at my phone when it rang and I saw my mum's name on the screen, and I remember thinking, she never calls this early. And then I answered it anyway because she was my mum. And you answer when your mum calls at 7:42 in the morning because something in your body assumes it must be important. I was standing in my kitchen, still in my pajamas. The coffee machine was doing its thing, in the corner, that specific gurgling sound it makes in the last 30 seconds before it finishes, and I had my favourite mug already sitting under the spout waiting. The blue one, with the small chip on the handle that I kept meaning to throw away and never did. My mum said, "Good morning, sweetheart. Did I wake you?" I said, "No, I'm up." "What's going on?" She said, "I just wanted to catch you before your day got busy." And something about the way she said that made me put my hand on the counter. I do not know why. Some instinct. Something that lives below conscious, thought that recognized a tone in her voice it had heard before, a practiced lightness. The kind of light that people put into their voice specifically when what they are about to say is heavy. She said, "Your dad and I have been going through some things financially. Nothing dramatic. Just we got ourselves into a bit of a situation, and we were hoping you might be able to help us out." I said, "Okay, what kind of situation?" She said, "It's about $50,000. The coffee machine stopped gurgling. The kitchen went very quiet. I said, "I'm sorry?" She said, "I know it sounds like a lot, but we've been talking about it, and we think with your salary and your savings, you might be in a position to." I said, "Mom, stop. Where did $50,000 of debt come from?" Pause. Long enough to tell me she had prepared an answer, but was deciding in real time how much of it to use. She said, "It's just accumulated over the years. You know how things add up." I know how things add up. I stood in my kitchen with my hand on the counter and my coffee getting cold in the machine, and I thought about every single thing I knew about how my parents' money had moved over the last 15 years. I thought about Vivienne's car. I thought about Vivienne's wedding. I thought about the down payment check my mother had mentioned once, and then never mentioned again, like she knew she had said something she shouldn't have. I thought about 32 years of my parents looking at 2 daughters, and choosing every single time, in every single situation, to pour everything they had into one of them. And I thought about the fact that the one they had poured everything into was not standing in her kitchen right now, being asked to fix the damage. I was. My name is Claire Donovan, and this is the morning everything I had been quietly carrying for 3 decades finally became too heavy to hold. If you are new here, subscribe and hit the like button right now before we go any further. It helps more than you know, and it means I can keep sharing stories like this one. Okay, let me take you back, because you need to understand what this family looked like from the inside before you can understand what that phone call actually meant. I want to take you to a specific Saturday morning when I was 14 years old. That is the morning I stopped being surprised. It was my birthday. Not a big birthday. Not 16 or 18. Just 14. But still, my birthday. The one day a year that is supposed to be yours specifically. The one day where the attention in the room is pointed at you and not away from you. I came downstairs at 9 in the morning, and my parents were in the kitchen. My dad was reading the paper. My mum was on the phone. The kitchen smelled like coffee and toast, and I stood in the doorway in my socks and waited for one of them to look up. My dad looked up first. He said, "Morning, Claire Bear." I said, "Morning?" He went back to the paper. My mum was still on the phone. She saw me and waved. The kind of wave that means I see you, I will be a minute. I poured myself a bowl of cereal. I sat at the table. I ate my cereal. My mum got off the phone about 10 minutes later and said, "Oh honey, happy birthday. I have to run Vivienne to dance practice at 10, but tonight we will do something special, okay?" I said okay. She ran Vivienne to dance practice. That night, they took us to a restaurant. It was fine. There was a small cake with my name on it, and everyone sang, and I smiled and said thank you, and it was fine. It was always fine. That is the word I grew up inside. Fine. Everything was fine. My childhood was fine. My parents loved me fine. My birthday was fine. Fine is the word you use when something is not quite right, but not quite wrong enough to justify saying so, and I used it for 18 years. Until I didn't. Here is what the Donovan household actually looked like from the inside. My parents were not bad people. I need you to hear that, because this story gets complicated, and I never want you to walk away thinking I am painting them as villains. They were not villains. They were just people who had made a decision so early in our lives that by the time I was old enough to see it, they had completely forgotten making it. The decision was Vivienne. Not a conscious decision, probably. Not a meeting they called where they said, let us invest everything into the younger one and leave the older one to figure it out. It was not that deliberate. It was just the slow accumulation of 1,000 small choices over 20 years that all tilted the same direction. Vivienne cried louder, so she got picked up faster. Vivienne wanted things more visibly, so she got them more consistently. Vivienne's feelings filled a room, so her feelings got addressed first. And I was quiet. I was capable. I figured things out without making noise about them, and my parents looked at that and called it strength, and never once asked whether the quietness was strength or whether it was a child who had learned that making noise did not get her anywhere, so she had stopped making it. I was 12 when I first noticed the pattern properly. Vivienne had just started competitive gymnastics, 3 practices a week, equipment costs, competition fees, travel expenses. My parents paid all of it, without discussion, drove her to every practice, sat in the stands at every competition with a video camera and matching team t-shirts. That same year, I made the school debate team. I came home and told my parents at dinner. My dad said, good for you, kiddo. My mum said, that's wonderful, honey. Vivienne, honey, are you eating enough? Your coach said, you need more protein before practice. The conversation moved on. I sat at that dinner table, and I ate my food, and I told myself it was fine, but I filed it away. I filed everything away. That filing system, that quiet internal record of every skipped recital and every conversation that pivoted away from me, and every time I needed something, and somehow the timing was never quite right, that filing system became the thing that saved me when I was 32 years old, standing in my kitchen with $50,000 being asked of me like I was an ATM they had forgotten they owned. Let me tell you about the money specifically, because it is important, and because I think people sometimes feel uncomfortable when women talk about family money, and I want to be very direct about it. When Vivienne turned 18, my parents sat her down and told her they had been saving for her education. I know this because Vivienne told me. She was excited. She called me to tell me. She did not say anything weird about it. She was just excited and sharing good news with her sister. I was 20 at the time, 2 years into paying my own way through university, working at a coffee shop 4 mornings a week, and tutoring high school students on weekends. I sat on the other end of that phone call, and I listened to my sister be excited. And when we hung up, I sat in my dorm room, a room I was paying for myself, and I thought about whether my parents had ever sat me down to tell me about savings they had put aside for my education. They had not, because there were none. I had asked my dad once. Before I started university, I had sat across from him at the kitchen table and asked him quietly whether there was anything they could contribute, because the loans I was looking at were significant. He had looked at me with genuine discomfort and said, "We're a little stretched right now, Claire. You know how things are." I did know how things were. I just also knew that 2 years later, they were not stretched enough to prevent them from sitting Vivienne down and telling her about the education savings they had for her. I never brought it up. Fine. Everything was fine. After my mother's phone call, I did not call her back for 4 days. Not to punish her, not as a strategy. I just needed 4 days to think before I said anything, because I have learned slowly and at great personal cost that the words you say in the first 24 hours after something like that phone call are almost never the words you actually mean. They are the surface words, the shock words. And I did not want to give my mother the shock words. I wanted to give her the real ones. But first I needed to know the full picture, because $50,000 of debt does not appear from nowhere. And I had been given the version my mother wanted me to have, and I knew from 32 years of being Susan Donovan's daughter that the version she wanted me to have was carefully edited. I called my dad's brother, my Uncle Pete. He was the family member my dad talked to about real things, financial things, the practical things that my mother handled with soft voices and careful framing. Uncle Pete answered on the second ring. I said, Pete, I need you to tell me what you know about Mum and Dad's finances. He was quiet for a second. Then he said she called you. I said yes. He said I told Gerald not to do it that way. I told him you needed the full picture first. I said, so give me the full picture. What Uncle Pete told me over the next 40 minutes rearranged everything I thought I understood about my family's financial situation. The $50,000 in debt. $31,000 of it was a loan my parents had taken out 3 years earlier. For Vivienne's wedding. The wedding I had attended as a bridesmaid in a dress I paid for myself. The wedding with the flowers that cost more than my monthly salary. The wedding my parents had thrown for Vivienne and her husband Ryan, with a smile and a toast and zero visible sign that they were doing it on borrowed money. The remaining $19,000 was credit card debt accumulated over years of what Pete called supplementing Vivienne's lifestyle. Grocery runs when Vivienne and Ryan were short at the end of the month. Car repair bills, a vacation they had contributed to. Small amounts that had compounded, over time, into something that was no longer small. I sat in my apartment after that phone call, and I wrote it all down in a notebook. I do not know why I wrote it down. Something in me needed to see it in my own handwriting, needed to make it physical and real, and in front of me, so I could not talk myself into minimizing it. $31,000 for a wedding. $19,000 supplementing a life. $50,000 total. And the person they had called to fix it was the daughter who had received none of what created it. I closed the notebook. I put it on my kitchen table, and I sat there for a very long time. I called my best friend Sasha that night. Sasha had known me since university. She had watched the Vivienne dynamic from close range for 12 years, and she was one of the 3 people on earth I trusted to tell me the truth when I was too close to a situation to see it clearly. I told her everything. The phone call, Uncle Pete, the numbers. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" I said, "I don't know yet." She said, "Yes, you do." I said, "I don't want to blow up my family." She said, "Claire, your family blew something up a long time ago. You have just been standing in the wreckage pretending the building is still standing." I sat with that for a while. Then I said I need to talk to Vivienne first. Before I talk to my parents, I need to know if she knows. Sasha said, "And if she does?" I said then, "That changes what I do next." I called my sister on a Thursday evening. Vivienne and I had a relationship that I would describe as warm and slightly careful. We loved each other. Genuinely. She was my sister, and there had been enough real moments between us over the years, late-night conversations, and genuine laughter, and the specific closeness that comes from growing up in the same house and sharing the same parents. That the love was real, but there was also always the thing between us that neither of us named. The imbalance. The way our parents were different with each of us. Vivienne had always had the grace to be slightly uncomfortable about it whenever it surfaced directly. She had never been cruel about what she received. She had just received it. The way you receive weather, without questioning whether it was fair, because fair had never been a framework anyone in that house had given her reason to apply. She answered on the 3rd ring. She said, "Hey you, what's up?" I said, "Mum called me this week." Brief pause. She said, "Oh." Not what did she say, or what did she want. Just, "Oh," which told me she knew. I said, "Vivienne, did you know she was going to call me about the money?" She said, "I knew they were struggling. I didn't know they were going to call you specifically." I said, "Do you know where the debt came from?" Longer pause. She said some of it was the wedding. I know that. I said $31,000 of it was the wedding. Silence. I said, and the rest is years of helping you and Ryan when you were short. She said, Claire. I said, I am not saying this to make you feel bad. I am saying it because I need you to understand the full picture of what I was called and asked to fix. She said, I didn't ask them to do any of that. You know that, right? I never asked them to take out a loan for the wedding. I told them we could do something smaller. I said, I know you didn't ask. But they did it. And now they have called me to cover it. Me, who they never took out a loan for, who put herself through school, working 2 jobs, who has never once asked them for anything because I learnt before I was a teenager that asking didn't get me anywhere. Vivienne was very quiet. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Smaller. She said, I know it wasn't equal. I have always known it wasn't equal. And I didn't know how to. I didn't think it was my place to. I said it wasn't your responsibility to fix it, but I need you to hear me say it out loud right now, because I have never said it out loud to you before, and I think I should have a long time ago. She said, I hear you. I said, and I need to know whose side you are on when I call Mum and Dad, because I am going to call them, and I am going to tell them no. And it is going to be a hard conversation, and I need to know before I have it whether you are going to be standing in my corner or in theirs. Long silence. Then Vivienne said, yours. I'm in yours. I believed her. And she meant it. What happened next proved that. I called my parents on a Sunday afternoon, both of them. I asked them to put me on speaker, so I only had to say everything once. My mum answered. She said, oh Claire, sweetheart, I'm so glad you called back. We were starting to worry. I said, Mom, put me on speaker and get Dad. Something in my voice. She put me on speaker. My dad said, hey Claire Bear. I said I need to talk to both of you about the phone call Mom made last week. And I need you to listen to everything I say before either of you responds. Can you do that? My mum said, of course, honey. I said I'm not going to cover the debt. Silence. I said I want to explain why, and I need you to hear the full explanation before you say anything. My dad said, Claire, we wouldn't ask if we weren't really. I said, Dad, please. He went quiet. I took a breath, and then I said everything. Not screaming, not crying, not the version of this conversation I had played out in my head at age 14, at age 19, at age 25. Every time I had filed something away and told myself fine. Just the real version. I said, you have spent my entire life pouring everything you had into Vivienne. Her education, her car, her wedding, her monthly shortfalls. And I am not saying you did not love me. I know you love me. But love and investment are 2 different things. And you invested in her, and you trusted me to figure it out alone. And I did. I figured it out alone every single time. And I never said anything, because I did not think saying anything would change anything. I said, but now you are calling me to fix a problem that was created entirely by the investment you made in her. And I need you to sit with that for a second. The loan you took out for her wedding. The money you sent them every month. The years of choosing her financial comfort over your own financial stability. That is where this debt came from. And you called me. I said I love you both. And I am not walking away from this family. But I am not covering this debt. Not because I cannot, but because I will not be the person who pays for a pattern I was never included in. Silence on the other end of the phone that lasted long enough that I checked to make sure the call had not dropped. Then my mum started crying. Not manipulative crying, real crying. The kind that sounds like something breaking rather than something performing. My dad, said Claire. We didn't realize how it looked from where you were standing. I said I know you didn't. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. You genuinely didn't realize. Because I never told you. And because you never asked. My dad said I'm sorry. He said it quietly, without qualification. I said I know, Dad. My mum said, what do we do about the debt? I said that is not my problem to solve, but I will tell you what I think. I think you call Vivienne and Ryan, and you sit down with them, and you tell them the full picture, and you figure it out together. Because if anyone should be part of solving this, it is the people whose life it funded. My mum said we don't want to put that on Vivienne. I said, Mom, you just put it on me. Silence. I said, I love you. I have to go. I hung up. I sat in my apartment for a long time after that call. Not crying, not relieved, just still. The specific stillness of a person who has just put down something they have been carrying for a very long time and whose body has not yet figured out what to do with the empty hands. Sasha texted me 20 minutes later. She said, how did it go? I said everything I needed to say. She said, and? I said, and my dad apologized. My mom cried, and I didn't cover the debt. She sent back one word, good. Vivienne called me that night. She said Mum called me. I said I figured she would. She said she told me what you said. All of it. I said, okay. She said Ryan and I are going to help them with the debt. I talked to him tonight. We can cover most of it over time. I said, Vivienne, you don't have to do that. She said, yeah, I do. Not because they asked, because it's right. And because I have been the reason for a lot of things in this family that I never took responsibility for. And I think it is time I started. I did not say anything for a moment. Then I said thank you. She said, I'm sorry, Claire, for all of it, for the version of our childhood you had that I did not see clearly enough. I said I know. She said, can we be better, going forward? I said yes. I think we can, and I meant it. Here is where I am now. My parents and I are talking. Not easily. Not without the weight of that phone call and everything it opened, sitting somewhere in the room when we speak. But talking. My dad called me 2 weeks after the Sunday conversation. He asked if he could take me to lunch, just the two of us. I said yes. We sat in a diner booth across from each other, and he ordered the same thing. He always ordered club sandwich, no tomato, coffee, black. And for the first 20 minutes, we talked about nothing important. His garden, my work project, the weather. And then he put his coffee cup down, and he looked at me, and he said I did not see you clearly enough for a long time, and I want you to know that I understand that now, and I am sorry. I looked at my dad, this man, this genuinely imperfect human man, who had loved me in all the ways he knew how, and had missed me in all the ways he did not. And I felt something I had not felt about my family in years. Not fixed, not resolved, just open, like a window that had been painted shut for a long time, had been pushed up an inch, just enough to feel the air. That is where we are. Open, an inch. And I am choosing to believe that an inch, a real, honest, genuinely earned inch, is a place to start. If you made it to the very end of Claire's story, thank you. Really, this one was not easy, and you stayed all the way through. If any part of it hit you, the birthday Saturday, the filing system, the word fine, the phone call, the diner booth, drop it in the comments. Tell me which moment got you. I read every single one, and I want to know. If Claire's story moved something in you, share it right now. Send it to someone who has been the Claire in their family, the one who figured it out alone, the one who was trusted to be fine because no one looked closely enough to see that fine was not the same thing as okay. They need to hear this story. Like this video if you stayed until the last word. And subscribe, because I have more stories coming that are going to stop you completely. I will see you then.